All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, JK, and we are kicking off a fitness and nutrition adjacent episode. It's a Tuesday, and that is what we do. And by we, I mean I, and I guess we, whoever else is listening to the Help Me Understand podcast. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 5 foundational habits that actually work in order to build what I call your forever fit foundation. So before getting into those 5 habits, I first, as always, want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I truly never take it for granted for every listen, every message, every rating, every review, whatever the case may be. Even if you listen and you just never reach out, I still appreciate you. So thank you. Just want to take that moment to express some gratitude for listening to the Help Me Understand podcast. Also, we'll take an additional moment with an extra special thank you to those of you who have responded over the last couple of weeks, whether it's been to questions that I've asked for your feedback on here on the podcast, or for those of you on my email list who have also responded to a couple of requests that I've had for information or just any sort of feedback on how things are or are not impacting you as far as what I share there. So speaking of email, if you are not on my email list, then you probably want to change that. So hop into the notes in this particular episode. You'll see a link to sign up for my email list. I am, I believe, pretty non-spammy when it comes to email. At the least, I'll send you one email each week that'll have a workout in it. At the worst, I might send 3. But typically the sweet spot is 1 to 2 emails a week. One of those will have a workout in there where I also do a segment called Behind the Screen, where I walk through intentions and things like that for the workouts, different adjustments that you can make, what I was thinking about as I programmed this particular workout, and some insights that you typically or for sure won't get just simply by scrolling Instagram to see workouts, especially the ones that I post. So with that, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. And I will share with you a little bit of how my creative process typically works. So it'll provide maybe some interesting insight. If you don't find this interesting, fast forward about maybe 1 minute and we'll get to the good stuff. So the way that my brain kind of works creative process wise is that I am often thinking about different things from a habits and actions standpoint that are going to move the needle, whether you're my client or someone that I've just had a conversation with. And then very often I will put particular concepts in my head and certain things will come to mind that I can match them up with music. And that might sound super weird to you if you are not somebody that has known me for a super long time. So for those who have known me a really long time, I know I've got at least one person that's listening who knew me back in the college days. I was a DJ for about 5 years. And that is one of those skills that I believe if you really know how to rock a party, it just never really leaves you, with understanding how to read a crowd and then thinking to yourself, okay, what would really get things moving right now? And how could I seamlessly mix this one song to the next song and still keep the crowd moving and keep most everybody happy, except for the drunk guy who keeps requesting thong song for like the 6th time, like all that good stuff. So the way that my creative process works is I think of something like habits, for example. I'll tell you how this episode worked out. I've been thinking very often about just basic foundational habits. You've heard it all before, and that's what popped into my head. Heard it all before. And if you are a semi R&B aficionado, then you're probably familiar with the Sunshine Anderson song, Heard It All Before. And I thought to myself, I should probably do an episode called Heard It All Before, 5 habits that actually work when it comes to your fitness and nutrition. So here we are. Welcome to my brain. All right. So let's go ahead and dig into this. And the idea of calling this episode Heard It All Before is primarily based on my point of view that when it comes to building a body that feels good and moves well and is built for outlasting particular things that may happen and built for resilience, I don't believe that that is built by always chasing something that's absolutely brand new or innovative or different. I think that it more often than not, or not I think, I believe down in the depths of my soul that it's about consistently showing up and doing the things that you know work. So the opposite of this is what is commonly referred to as like shiny object syndrome, or sometimes the squirrel mentality, where you're always chasing something different and we're really drawn to all of these different things. So for example, like branded or named diets, workout challenges, going on like a multiple day fast or cleanse, like all that stuff, it seems like super new and exciting. And when it comes down to it, some of those things absolutely do what they advertise that they're going to do in the time frame that you do them. So I'm not here to argue that. The argument that I will present in my perspective here before getting into these 5 things that I believe are the foundational things is that these things that we'll call them innovative and shiny and all this other stuff, the reason that they work isn't because of the branding and all of that sexy stuff that's there. They work because they basically center themselves around 1, 2, or maybe, well, very rarely do they cover all 5, but they center themselves around 1 or 2 of the 5 habits that we're about to actually break down today. So I think about it also in terms of like fashion. So every few years, there are particular trends that seem to come back around just with maybe a bit of a new twist on them, not really. And as somebody who's been in the retail space for the better part of about 30 years at this point, and a good amount of that, I'm no longer in what we call soft lines, which would be clothing. I'm no longer in soft lines anymore. However, that's where I pretty much got my start, and then had been in soft lines for a number of years, like spent 2 decades. Yeah, 2 decades in soft lines. And even specifically, the majority of those 20 years were actually spent in women's clothing, or not in women's clothing, but working in women's fashion. You know what I mean? So with that, if you're me and you've been involved somewhat adjacently to the fashion industry for a number of years, you've seen, much like I have, the same trends just recycle themselves. I think just recently, like I saw low-rise jeans, they were trying to bring those back. I remember like seeing my daughter like sporting Birkenstocks. I'm like, those are back, because that definitely was like a late 90s thing. I graduated high school in 96, and that was like a thing back then with the LL Bean backpack and all that jazz. Every now and then you'll see like the baggy jeans or the boyfriend jeans come back in style, and that was a thing before. The only trend that I don't think I've seen come back has been when we decided to do like business casual at the club with like express button downs, and then every woman was like jeans and a cute top or black pants, whatever it may be. All right, let's get back on topic. So very similar to fashion, where things just kind of get recycled, repackaged, and then rebranded as something else. That's how I believe a lot of things are happening within the fitness and nutrition space. And at the end of the day, again, it really comes down to, for me, just generally 5 basic things that are just being recycled over and over. So spoiler alert, I believe that when you can establish a really solid foundation of those 5 basic things, those 5 foundations, then you are well on your way to the goals that you are looking to not only achieve, but also maintain. So why don't we jump into this? First, I'll give you the 5 things that I wrote down. And again, part of my creative process, I just jot things down in my phone as I think them, or on a Post-it note that might be on the counter, and then hopefully find it on a day where today I want to sit down and record a podcast. So those 5 things in no particular order. Number 1, lift weights. Number 2, go for walks. Number 3, get enough sleep. Number 4, prioritize protein, fruits, and vegetables. And number 5, drink water. So those are my 5. Lift weights, go for walks, get enough sleep, prioritize protein, fruits and vegetables, and drink water. So thanks for listening to, I'm just joking. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you a short little point of view on each of those 5 things, why I believe they're important. I'll just spend, 1 or 2 minutes on each of these. I won't be before you long here. And then what I'm going to do is, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I'm actually going to present basically like a counter argument, or what I'm going to call like the other side of the door when it comes to sticking with the 5 foundational habits. So stick with me through this for about, let's say like 10, 15 minutes. while I walk through those 5 things. And then after that, like I said, I'm going to present like the argument. So I'm going to basically, it's like the devil's advocate, but I didn't really want to call it devil's advocate. So I'm going to say, I'm going to present the other side of the door. So, a door, sometimes you're on one side and it makes sense to push, and the other side, it makes sense to pull. So we're going to go to the other side of the door after I'm done with this. So habit number 1 of lifting weights. I believe that that is part of a Forever Fitness foundation because it helps you build strength, it preserves muscle, it builds muscle, and all of those things, regardless of age, as you continue to progress in age, they will support all of the functions that you need. So for me, really, strength training it's basically just adding bricks and making your foundation much more solid. You might not always see the immediate results in the moment, but it's something that you are for sure, if you stick with strength training, or when you stick with strength training, you will find that that will come to benefit you, whether it's in the moment or not. You will find that that will come to benefit you for years to come. Now, from a scientific standpoint, there are studies that are out there. And then, of course, you take science and you mix that with social media. And then you have that beautifully confusing mix of what happens to people. And not even right now, I think the narrative generally is, hey, you are going to have muscle that declines with age. And while I do find that to be scientifically true, I think that many times there can be a pretty strong argument that age alone doesn't specifically mean that your muscle is going to significantly decline. I think that it's age in combination with moving less, potentially undernourishing, and then also not challenging your body by going to the gym or at home, wherever you may be, and doing resistance training. I want to make sure that I start things off with habit number 1, lift weights. So even if you think what I was talking about with like the shiny object syndrome and different things like that, even like your newest, most innovative workout plan, for the most part, they're always going to involve lifting weights because lifting weights works. All right, habit number 2, go for walks. So the reason that I put this as part of the Forever Fitness Foundation is because going out for walks, 1, you can get outdoors, which is absolutely fantastic. If you are not in a position to do that, being able to get up and move your body in a purposeful way, whether it's going up and down stairs, going from one end of the office building to the other, one end of the hall to the other, going to the laundry room, back to the kitchen, whatever it may be, getting in those periodic steps and that movement, that's going to increase your NEAT, what we call your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. I did a previous episode, a few episodes back on a Tuesday, doing a breakdown of TDEE, which is your total daily energy expenditure. So while I won't dig super heavy into that because I went pretty in depth in that particular episode, getting steps in and non-specific, like, hey, this is my walking time movement, like just getting steps in just in general, and keeping your body moving periodically throughout the day and avoiding consistent long periods of being sedentary. So I don't expect you to get up in the middle of the night. I'm just saying, if you look at your average week and you find that for 12 to more hours of the day, you are basically not moving, or even in an 8-hour workday, you find that you're glued to your chair the entire time. That's something that you want to take a look at and should take a look at. Okay, how can I break these particular pockets of time up so that I'm getting some movement in? Because back to TDEE, getting in just basic everyday movement is a big portion of where your energy expenditure comes from. And more often than not, folks have this kind of backwards relationship with thinking that exercise is the primary way to burn calories, and it just is not. When it comes to percentage wise, it's one of the smaller percentages of the TDEE pie. So even just basics, like if you can get in, let's say, a 10-minute or more walk after you eat a meal, that's something that has been proven to help manage blood sugar and just overall digestion. So those are some things that can be really, 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 really solid. If we talk about the shiny object syndrome, under going for walks, there are definitely plenty of well-meaning step challenges and things like that out there. I did an episode also about the myth of 10,000 steps and where that came from and the history behind that. And I hate to, be the bearer of potentially bad news. And even as someone who has promoted step challenges and things like that in the past and still continue to do that, there's nothing special specifically about 10,000 steps. It's about taking the opportunity to get in consistent movement throughout pockets of your day. So even like your big, huge, 10,000 step days, 10,000 step challenges and things like that, it really just comes down to getting in more movement. Just let's give it a fancy name. So the basic habit there is go for a walk. All right. Habit number 3, get enough sleep. Now with this particular one, I will be about as transparent as I want to be and tell you that I have a bias when it comes to the sleep thing, because I personally just don't identify as someone who does well with, let's say, 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I'm not sure if I can't really provide any scientific fact for you or anything like that. I certainly don't love trying to survive on, let's say, 4 to 5 hours of sleep. I'd say for me, what I've found just overall, both from my health markers, energy, biofeedback, mood, all of those different things standpoint, when I can get somewhere around 7 hours, if I can push it to 7, I am sitting like really good. And generally my range tends to be somewhere in the 6 to 7. So at times I will try and push it to 7 being the average. So I explain that just to share, I have a very, very explicit bias where I am all about phrasing sleep as get enough sleep, get adequate sleep, do the best you can to maximize your sleep, versus, well, if you didn't get 8 hours, you're a sucker. Like you're dead. So let's just say that up front. So as far as sleep goes, number one, just from an overall recovery standpoint, and I'm not specifically talking about recovery from workouts. I'm talking about recovery from your overall lifestyle, especially if you are somebody who is fairly active, if you are somebody who is, again, not just physically active, if you're somebody who just has a lot that goes on. The majority of the people that I serve, as far as my one-on-one clientele, I help busy adults. And when it comes down to it, I even will describe it as I help adults with responsibilities, whether they be responsibilities at work, at home, or all of the other places in between there. They've got things and people and and pets that they're responsible for. So being able to have a solid wind down routine, and wind, W-I-N-D, not W-I-N-E. So a solid wind down routine that promotes getting adequate sleep, proper sleep, and being able to wake up feeling at least decently energized. I'm not saying you wake out of bed and want to do like a front flip, don't hurt yourself. Just overall being able to not feel like death when you wake up each morning, that stuff is really important. And when it comes to trying to train or diet with poor sleep, it's a losing proposition. It's basically like you're trying to put like fuel, you're putting more gas into a car that basically has like an almost dead battery. It's not really going to help out at all. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of the battery first. There are also some additional pieces just from a science standpoint. There certainly have been plenty of studies which I've used to promote my own point of view around the value of sleep when it comes to just overall decision making. And I can't remember the exact study or meta-analysis that I read not too long ago that even talked about the nutrition choices, the difference in nutrition choices based on sleep. And what this study or group of studies, a meta-analysis, found was that lack of sleep led to less nutritious food choices. And I can say anecdotally, I have actually found that to be the case for sure, that cravings, I'm not necessarily sure about hunger, however, cravings definitely upticked or have upticked for people that I've worked directly with. And I've noticed this in myself also when sleep has not been adequate. Like I'm not even going to say optimized. It hasn't really been standardized. We're going to bed at like different times, waking up at weird times and all sorts of other stuff. So again, when it comes to a habit that I believe is part of a firm forever fitness foundation, getting enough sleep, I can't scream it from the mountaintops enough. As a little pro tip or a little inside information, if you're signing up for my email list, very soon here, I'm actually going to be releasing a little mini guide on sleep that will go out to email subscribers. So again, shameless plug, sign up for my email list. All right, we're getting into the last two. Habit number 4 here, prioritize protein, fruits, and veggies. So this is something that I think can and is often, talking is hard right now, can and is often then repackaged as that means you need to do carnivore, you need to do keto, you need to be plant-based, you need to be a vegetarian or a vegan or a breatharian or whatever else other tarian is out there. And that is the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. So when I talk about prioritize protein, fruits, and veggies, I'm saying exactly what I'm saying, to prioritize those things. I just don't believe myself to be someone who is a proponent of demonizing particular types of food, like processed foods, in any way, shape, or form. I come more from the angle of, are we prioritizing these other things as the majority of what our caloric intake is throughout the average day and week and month? Or is it this constant, what I will refer to as like a back and forth of, man, I know that I'm eating too much of this and too much of that. And typically when we say too much of this or too much of that, somebody will say, hey, I really need to start cutting carbs. And then when I'll ask them about cutting carbs, they typically start talking to me about pizza, which when we do a breakdown, typically the majority of the calories that they're consuming from that pizza, and I actually did this exercise with somebody the other day, the majority of the calories that are coming from that pizza are from fat calories, not from carbohydrate calories. That actually could be a whole nother podcast episode that we may get into. But just overall, instead of putting all of the energy into needing to avoid something, and I'm certainly not saying like just fill up on whatever. What I'm saying is, instead of putting all the energy into what you're avoiding, first make sure that you're prioritizing nutrient dense things like protein, fruits, and vegetables. So by prioritizing those particular things, then you can ensure that you're always getting enough things like, for example, protein to support muscle building and just overall recovery, carbs in the form of fruits and vegetables, because they contain a number of different micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals, things that are really important that also help regulate your blood sugar and gut health. You've got more fiber, just all sorts of different benefits that we have from prioritizing proteins, fruits, and veggies. And then you layer some of the other pieces, like slice of pizza here and there, donuts, cookies, all that stuff. Somebody's going to hear this and go, I can't believe that he's promoting doing that thing. And if that's how you're feeling, you basically didn't catch what I was throwing. And you know what? That is okay. We might just be playing a different sport. Like I'm throwing a football and you're holding up a baseball glove. I totally get it. It's all good. Do your thing. What I am saying here to close out this particular one, prioritize proteins, fruits, and veggies to ensure that those are part of the overall foundation of your nutrition, and it promotes your forever fitness foundation. All right, the last habit here, and certainly not least, drink water. And I did an episode on this one not too long ago either, or also talking about the benefits of hydration. So drinking water, it's not just about drinking water, it's also about staying hydrated. We talked about the importance of also electrolytes and the different things that those contain. Water, just there's so many benefits that it's kind of ridiculous at that point. And we talked about, sleep really being like the battery. And I think water can be somewhat like making sure that there's enough oil in your engine. Like you might still run without it, but eventually you're probably going to burn out. So staying hydrated, getting in enough water, making sure that you're adequately consuming electrolytes, those things are all important. So when I think about the flip side of that, and I'll actually get into like the opposite argument with just the overall thing, like the 5 habits, the other side of the door. But when I think about like challenges that may take water to the extreme, and I've talked about this before with 75 Hard, giving the blanket subscription or blanket prescription to everyone across the board of drinking 1 gallon of water, I do believe that a responsible prescription should be based on the individual. So, I'm not here to argue with the program itself. It's just if somebody were to ask me, hey, how much water would I drink? I would be asking them some questions before telling them how much to do. So side note, again, if you heard that and you said, JK just said you shouldn't do 75 Hard, miss me with that. I did a previous episode. You can hear my whole rundown on that one also. So when there's a challenge that you've got that's got some sort of water goal and things like that, just remember, like I said when I first jumped off this episode, a lot of these things are really centered around things that are very foundational and basic, and then they just take it to a completely different level. All right, let's see here. So the last thing I want to get into before we start wrapping up here is I took some time to sit down and I asked myself, so what if I were to present the other side of the door here? If I were to present the devil's advocate argument for why the basics aren't enough, then how would I present that? So I just basically like sat down and I was like, okay, how would I argue against this? And the way that I would frame it is basically I'd say like, okay, cool. Like, I get it. Like this whole appeal of keeping things super simple, yeah, you just lift weights, you walk more, you sleep better. Cool. But the reality of things is that people these days are probably going to need more than just like basic stuff. So, I would really trying hard to present an argument against myself. So I would really hone in on the fact that people today, they need more than just like the basic stuff. Everybody's body is totally different. Everybody needs to be treated as an individual. We've got stress at an all-time high. That in and of itself is a totally different podcast episode also. So we got stress at an all-time high, and things like these basic like cookie cutter habits, like that's just not going to cut it these days. Like you need to take it up to another level. So if you're trying to tell somebody, just drink water, eat veggies, it's just, it's like telling somebody who's in like credit card debt, well, just spend less. Like it's way too simple, and it ignores like the nuance of things. I'm really trying here. I would also say that, it leaves too much up to interpretation, or it doesn't feel strict enough. It doesn't feel structured enough. So people need specific advanced process things, or advanced progress things, I guess I would say. They need to make sure that they're tracking macros. You need to make sure that you have every piece of data under the sun. Like everybody needs to wear a CGM, like all of this stuff. So if you're just going to say that somebody who's struggling with consistency needs to just go back to the basics, it doesn't feel like you're actually listening to like what that person is saying, because you're just saying that they just need to do basic stuff. And so, that's the argument that I would try and make. And as you may or may not, been able to tell, that's very difficult for me to kind of try to do. However, that is based on some of the things that have been presented to me in the past when I have tried to address what some of the basics were that we could stand to do a bit better with a client or somebody who was just talking to me just casually, or maybe we had done like a phone call for a consultation. And here's my point of view on this. I think that very often folks mistake, I'll just say me, however, I think there are others in this boat, other coaches in this boat. I think folks often mistake my point of view of the power of the basics as just stick to the basics, bro. Like don't do anything outside of that. And that is not actually my intention. So a visual that I will use is when we are working to establish a foundation, I want people to truly think of these 5 things, which again is lift weights, go for walks, get enough sleep, prioritize protein, fruits and veggies, and drink water. I want people to picture those 5 things as a solid box foundation, almost like it's not a ledge. It's it's a box. It's something you stand on. It is not a box that you stay within. So very often I am thinking that when people are presenting this rebuttal argument to me about, well, people need more than that, they're looking at it as I'm saying, don't ever do anything except focus on these 5 things and that's it, where that's not what I intend to say. What I'm intending them to understand is make sure that these things are part of the solid foundation that you then build on top of, versus a box that you must stay within. In fact, I do strongly believe that many times for people to reach the goals that they have, they will need to go to the extreme in some of these areas. So for example, when it comes to dieting, if someone has a very specific fat loss goal, it may not be enough just to prioritize proteins, fruits, and veggies. It may be that instead of that being 60, 70, or 80%, maybe they need to be at 90% or more compliance and commitment to that being part of their diet in order to reach the goals that they have. When it comes to lifting weights, it may be part of their fitness foundation to work out 2 to 3 times a week. However, if they have very specific goals of like specific strength goals and or very specific I want to look a certain way goals, and I'm not even talking like big beefy huge like bulky bodybuilder, whatever that's supposed to be these days. I'm talking if you are just an everyday person, but you're telling me you've got very specific like I want to look this tone, then 2 to 3 days may not cut it and probably won't cut it for the results that you're expecting. So again, my intention is not to try to lead people down the road of don't ever do more than this. It's more along the lines of make sure that this is part of your foundation and build from that. Okay. So that's where I want to start to wrap things up. So again, just to quickly recap, like we've got these 5 particular habits, and I am a very, very strong believer again that when, not if, when you can make these 5 things a consistent and rhythmic part of your fitness foundation, you are set for the rest of your life. And it's about making tweaks occasionally, bringing 1 or 2 of those things to like the brink, like the ceiling. I've talked about ceiling and floor, bringing those to the ceiling and really pushing to see how hard you can go, and then bring it back to the foundation. Just going through those particular things. I believe that if you can do those things, you are well on your way to not only achieving, also sustaining your fitness goals. So again, you've heard it all before, but maybe this time it's time to actually like execute it and do it a bit differently and do it consistently so that you stick with what works. So if you are interested to help you out with that, I have a 30-day habit tracker that I built that went out to my email list. If you already missed it, you can certainly, like I said, hop on my email list. And if I see that you subscribed shortly after this episode goes out, or when I see a new subscriber, typically I will just reach out and just say, hey, is there anything I can help you out with? That sort of thing. Like, thanks for subscribing. Keep it pretty simple. But if you do either subscribe to my email or you can DM me on Instagram and ask for the tracker, I will send that to you. It's basically just a 30-day habit tracker where you track 3 things to see where you currently are. And it starts with step 1 of really figuring out, okay, where do I need to start? And that's with an assessment. And I'm actually going through that like real time. I'm going through that myself. I believe it's June 10th. So I'm on day number 10 right now. So you can reach out to me and I will gladly send that to you. There's no obligation or anything with that. I'm just out here to try to help. So all right, with that, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. If you could do me one last favor, leave a rating, review, subscribe, do all the things. I sincerely appreciate it. So thank you again for listening. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.